Okay, as we've gotten a couple minutes past the hour, I will get this event started. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming to this report launch event with the Emerging Voices Network at Basic. So just to get us going on which report we are launching today, it is the Emerging Voices Future of Nuclear Security. Um, so my name is Declan Penrose. I'm a policy fellow working on the Emerging Voices Network program at Basic. Basic is an independent, non-profit think tank whose mission is to safeguard humanity and Earth's ecosystem from nuclear risks and interconnected security threats for generations to come. Um, the Emerging Voices Network is a digital global network of high potential early career researchers on nuclear weapons and nuclear policy issues. So the project that I've led, that led to this report being made, was part of my Horizon 2045 Nuclear Futures Fellowship. So after receiving training and support from the Horizon 2045 team and the Ploughshares Fund, I conducted a 9-month project funded uh, to utilize foresight methodologies. So before I get into exactly the work I did in the report, I thought who better to be our keynote speaker today than the president of Horizon 2045 and one of the people that helped train me for this fellowship, President Erica Gregory. So Gregory is the president of Horizon 2045, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative exploring the ways the current confluence of global threats will reshape systems of human and planetary security. So this role followed a decade serving as the managing director of N Square, which grant-making intermediary and innovation network advancing nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament goals. So in that capacity, Erica led a funder collaborative comprising of the MacArthur, Skoll, the Hewitt Foundations, along with the Ploughshares Fund and the Carnegie Corporation of New York. So Erica has long operated with the nexus between strategic foresight, systems analysis, philanthropy, and design. And along with her Horizon 2045 founding partners at the Nuclear Threat Initiative and the Rhode Island School of Design, Erica and her team are now drawing on these methods to develop new security frameworks and tools to guide transnational organizations and world leaders in imagining the kinds of institutions, approaches, and infrastructure required to secure the future world. So I'll now hand over to Erica who can speak in detail about Horizon 25's brilliant work. And yeah, the floor is yours, Erica.
Well, thank you very much. I just have to acknowledge that while some of you are probably ready for a beer, I'm just starting the day here in Washington and having as much coffee as I can possibly have during this phone call. So hello, I am just delighted to be here to celebrate the launch of the report and the map and scenarios in the report. I want to start by acknowledging the valuable contribution that Declan and his colleagues, whom you're about to hear from, have made on behalf of both Ploughshares and Horizon 2045, and also our funders at MacArthur and Skoll for this project. I'm here to say, well done. You're exactly why we started the Nuclear Fellows Futures Fellowship, and we're very proud and excited indeed. So in 1981, when I was living in New York as an 18-year-old college student, life was really gritty. Windows of subway cars and apartment buildings were often broken, muggings were common, garbage and vermin at every turn. That year, there were 2,200 murders in New York City. Just to compare, just to give you a sense of scale, in 2024, there were 300. So, getting a series of trains from my apartment in Brooklyn for an audition at the Juilliard School of Drama involved a fair amount of uncertainty. I had told not one person that I was auditioning because I wanted to avoid the shame of having to confess later that I hadn't gotten in. These statistics, too, were brutal. And that year, over 1,000 people auditioned for just 24 spots in the drama program, which is a 2% acceptance rate. I thought I was being strategic, protecting myself from public failure. A little bit like another auditioner who did his whole audition with a paper bag over his head with just eye holes punched through so he could see where he was going, even though nobody could see him. But if I was honest, deep in my heart of hearts, I had a sense of intuition telling me something completely different, which was that I belonged there. I just didn't yet know all the reasons why. I would have thought it imprudent arrogant, maybe even self-sabotaging to say that out loud. The rational argument against optimism would have been overwhelming. But sometimes the most important truths can't be captured by statistics and logic. The Juilliard School did, in fact, open its heavy doors to me that fall, and I spent the next 4 years preparing to become a classical actor in a repertory company. What I didn't and probably couldn't have envisioned is that all of that training was laying the foundation for a very different kind of career altogether. One that has taken me from the Singapore ministries of environment, education, community development, and defense to the futures of teaching and learning, scenarios of sustainable production and consumption, and scenarios about nuclear weapons. I worked in the late 1990s at Global Business Network, the firm that popularized foresight internationally and trained virtually every civil servant across South Asia and Scandinavia during that decade. I was struck by something that the godfather of scenario planning, who was called Pierre Vac, had written. The purpose of scenario planning is to generate new options that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. This insight, which seems so obvious right now, would prove foundational to everything that followed in my career, from my work as a founder of consulting firms to leading N Square and Horizon 2045 and to being with you here today. What I didn't fully understand then was how theater training had already prepared me for this work in ways I couldn't recognize for years. As a futurist, what made Pierre Vac unique was his integration of Eastern contemplative practices with rigorous business analysis. His extensive travels in India and Japan, studying with gurus and immersing himself in Buddhism and other Eastern philosophical traditions, taught him what practitioners call beginner's mind, the ability to observe without the filters of preconception. His colleagues noted his almost mystical ability to see patterns that others missed, which he attributed not to clairvoyance, but to disciplined patterns of attention, which resonated deeply with my own theater training at Juilliard and my experience practicing foresight. Just as drama requires actors to think beyond their individual roles to serve a larger story, scenario planning spans subject matter boundaries to learn how systems interact. Theater training teaches authentic inhabitation of different worldviews. Scenarios require genuinely exploring how various stakeholders, adversaries, allies, unexpected actors might think and behave under radically different circumstances. Acting is famously the process of being present enough and open enough to react authentically to whatever happens. In rehearsal, you run through a multitude of variations of every moment, each a different offer from a different actor. Scenario planning similarly rehearses multiple futures, building the ability to adapt to the things that seem impossible until they happen. Both require acute attention to what's actually happening right now beneath the surface appearances, the foundation for navigating uncharted waters with wisdom rather than just expertise. Peter Schwartz, who was a partner at Global Business Network, which became my training ground in the 1990s, taught us that scenario creation is a function of good imagination. He understood that, quote, if you wanted to see the future, you could not go to conventional sources of information. Which all brings me to the present. What strikes me most powerfully about life in 2025 is just how much of it would have seemed not just unlikely, but histrionic or absurd to imagine just a decade ago. London reaching 104 degrees Fahrenheit while European cities regularly experience heat apocalypse, deep fake videos of world leaders produced by teenagers on their laptops, a former US president facing criminal charges while running for re-election, or a full-scale land invasion of Europe accompanied by threats to use nuclear weapons. Each of these developments was in fact anticipated by various scenario exercises over the years, but they were typically relegated to the extreme or low probability categories. What we're learning repeatedly is that the unthinkable has a way of becoming routine more quickly than we can possibly expect, which is precisely why the work that you're all doing at the EVN matters so profoundly. You're not just imagining incremental change, you're seriously engaging with scenarios that your elders might dismiss as too extreme, too optimistic, or too pessimistic to warrant serious consideration. Yet history suggests that the extreme scenarios often prove more prescient than the reasonable middle ground. Perhaps my most profound shift in thinking about futures work has come through my collaboration with Pupil Bisht and other practitioners from the Global South. Pupil also worked with Declan in the Futures Fellowship. As Pupil says, we as foresight practitioners can often reproduce the same dominant ideas and value systems through our work, sometimes even unintentionally. We might not even know that it's happening. Her work on decolonizing futures has challenged me to examine the assumptions embedded in even the most well-intentioned practices and to ask whose voices are centered, whose futures are imagined, and whose wisdom is excluded. Our collaboration with futurists from the African diaspora in the Black speculative arts movement has deepened that understanding even further. The Afrofuturist tradition is just beginning is has always understood something that the mainstream foresight world is just beginning to grasp, which is that the future is not an extrapolation of current trends, but a space of possibility which must be actively imagined and claimed. These practitioners bring what we might call survival futures, visions born from communities that have had to imagine radically different ways of organizing society because the status quo was never designed for their flourishing. These perspectives might transform how we understand nuclear challenges too. Rather than asking how to maintain stability within existing power structures, we can ask, what would security look like if it were designed from the ground up to serve all of humanity? What institutions might emerge if we weren't constrained by current geopolitical arrangements? What forms of governance might become possible if we took seriously the wisdom of communities that have developed sophisticated approaches to collective decision making under conditions of extreme uncertainty? This is precisely the spirit that Declan brought to his extraordinary Nuclear Futures Fellowship Capstone Project, in which he and 37 experts from 7 security domains created the systems map and scenarios we're here to talk about today. They act as strategic provocations in a world where the unthinkable regularly becomes routine, and we often wonder why we didn't see it coming. And they're a perfect example of why we started the Nuclear Futures Fellowship with Ploughshares. The nuclear security field has been dominated for too long by the same voices and mental models. The field desperately needs a cadre of futurists, practitioners who combine deep domain expertise with sophisticated insights about change and the rigor of scenaric thinking. In that sense, the EVN is perfectly positioned to play a critical role because you're already demonstrating the interdisciplinary thinking, collaborative mindset, and systems perspective that effective foresight requires. I will finish by saying that our plans at Horizon 2045 include building out not only the Nuclear Futures Fellowship, but our international horizon scanning and sense-making network. With Declan's help, I hope we'll find ways to work with you all more purposefully on this and other things. The future belongs not to those who can predict it, but to those who can imagine ahead of time the strategic opportunities and challenges it may bring. And that means all of you. You are the folks who can imagine those things. I'm so grateful that you've asked me to kick off this meeting today and want to say congratulations to all of you.
Thank you very much, Erica. That was a fantastic introduction. And I am, yeah, just very glad that you were able to do it. And thank you for getting up early your time to take part as well. It's really appreciated as it's quite easy for me in the middle of my workday in in the time zone in the UK. But that was it was a fantastic introduction. And I think really fitting to for the members to hear exactly what your work is about and how much, the potential there is, I think, for Emerging Voices Network members to begin connecting with this. And congratulations on your new second cohort of the Nuclear Futures Fellowship as well. It's a fantastic group of people, some who are EVN members, and some other people who I know a bit as well, who I'm really excited to see what they do with their capstone projects. But now I will quickly move on to just kind of quickly discuss, introduce you to what I did for my project. And before I hand you over to some of the people who helped me out with it from the Emerging Voices Network. So in 2024, I was awarded a place on the Horizon 2045 Nuclear Futures Fellowship. And this was a joint venture between Ploughshares Fund and Horizon 2045. And it was designed for new and incumbent leaders who wanted to develop the adaptive change practices, tools, and relationships necessary to help the nuclear field succeed in a dramatically changing landscape, as Eric has just introduced us to before, with just how unpredictable things have become lately. We received intensive training in foresight methodologies over several online sessions and a brilliant week in Washington, D.C. as a adaptive leadership practices training week with the team. And we were also invited back to Washington a second time in September 2024 for the Horizon 2045, and Ploughshares co-hosted Security in the Future, which was a 3-day symposium designed to promote long-term thinking about intersections between nuclear challenges and other global threats to human and planetary security. So, us at the beginning of our projects, us as fellows were able to quickly present what was our early iterations of our ideas for our projects to a quite a sizable room of stakeholders and people working in the field, and we managed to get some really good feedback on it as well and get to speak to people in person about our projects. So furthermore, each fellow was given a grant to develop what was labeled a Capstone Project to implement the skills we had developed and then bring them back to our organizations on a 9-month project. And for my project, I wanted to produce a collaborative research with, of course, our Emerging Voices Network at Basic. But after participating in the Security in the Future workshop in DC, I was really struck by the incredible insights we received from participants from other security domains. So, for example, in the working group I was in for a workshop, we had somebody who worked in biosecurity and had worked in the Biden administration helping with their COVID-19 response and gave some really fascinating insights into how they approach international diplomacy and negotiations with other states regarding vaccines and stuff that you might not think about when you're thinking about developing nuclear arms control, but then, when the methods were explained and some of the logics going into, the levels of creativity in their negotiations, I thought was fascinating and it's things that I think we could really do within a nuclear field, especially with the position that arms control is in today. So this inspired me to reach out beyond the EVN and beyond the nuclear field itself and to try to think about speaking with early career networks specializing in across many different security domains. So this included climate security, biological security, finance, infrastructure, society and culture. And I very much picked those domains actually. They were inspired by the Horizon 2045 radar. And those are the kind of different security domains listed on their brilliant resource on their website, which is an enormous radar full of many potential drivers of change. That again, goes far beyond nuclear security and for on many different existential threats. It's a great tool and a great way to also inspire you if you're kind of struggling for an idea of what to write about or on a project because it is just full of so many different drivers and lots of informations and presents some of them in ways you wouldn't have thought of before. Um, so phase one of the project, I decided I wanted to create a systems map that would visualize the key drivers of the future of nuclear security according to the next generation of security experts. Um, this, in general, when I was talking about nuclear security, I was talking not just about, say the way the IAEA would talk about it in terms of kind of prevention of or response to kind of threats and sabotage involving nuclear materials, but I was also talking in general about arms control, about energy, weapons, even medicine, talking about it as broadly as I possibly could, bringing in all of these different domains to work on this. And I shared around what was called a scanning form, which was circulated amongst many early career networks across different domains internationally. And it asked them which drivers they believed would be most important in shaping the future of nuclear security in each of the seven security domains. So they were asked across all these different domains for their expertise. They were then asked to name at the end of the form which of these drivers they felt were the most connected and give us a brief explanation as to why they felt they were connected. These answers were then at the end converted into a systems map using the program Kumu with the guidance from our consultant Chris Spedding, who is the founder of Loopworks and has also worked with us at Basic for many years. And as great expertise in developing Kumu maps, I would definitely recommend checking out his UK nuclear field map that he made with for Horizon 2045 when it was still N Square, for example. That's still on our website. And I wanted to make something similar that would be a free to use access online map, which I've shared in the chat for everybody to see, which is now up and running. So that gave us, about 50 drivers in the end, many connections. It took a lot of refining to really, dilute the data in terms of making it comprehensible because I got so much interesting feedback and information on that. I then wanted then there was a second phase of the project, which sought to use this map to inspire a scenario exercise workshop. So 11 of the experts who had completed the scanning form were invited to work in four different focus groups where they were asked to envisage four different potential futures of nuclear security. They were tasked with picking a few of the drivers from the map to be their main source of inspiration. And then they were assigned four different levels of systems change, essentially, where one group was asked, for example, to look at the world if the current systems and dynamics and norms that are dominant, if they continued for the next 50 years, what would the future look like if things kept going as they were, if the status quo continued? Whilst on the extreme end of the spectrum, Group 4 was asked to think about radical change, and there was kind of no limits on the change they could foresee. Um, and as you will hear later from some of their members, they used that to make two scenarios, actually, a positive and a negative scenario. But they all created four fleshed out scenarios, which are written up in the reports, which I've also added. It will soon go onto the basic website. That is the final version. Um, and you can read through those scenarios. I think that they are a really fascinating insight into what our members think is going to shape the future of the nuclear field. And I think, as you can see across them, there are some quite consistent patterns, particularly with the role of how important the climate is to change, how important collaboration is, and how much the levels of collaboration between states and stakeholders, how much that dictates how much of a favorable future we achieve. It seems to be very much hinging heavily on our ability to work together and to open these spaces up, not just of states to communicate with each other, but also getting the public and civil society much more involved. So that is that's kind of my general introduction to the project. You can obviously read about it in the report, which goes into much more detail. So today, speaking for their groups, I have a member of Focus Group 3, which worked on adaptive change, and we have two members of Focus Group 4, which worked on radical change to talk about their work. So I will start by handing over to Hazel Ruzani from Focus Group 3. So Hazel is a senior medical physics student at the University of Zimbabwe. She is passionate about the practical applications of physics in healthcare to enhance diagnosis and treatment. So I will now hand over to Hazel. If you'd like to talk about your experience and your scenario with Focus Group 3. Thank you very much again for putting yourself forward to speak in this event.
Hi everyone, am I audible? Please confirm, Declan. Okay. As Declan said, I'm Hazel, representing Focus Group 3, and together with my teammates, my colleagues, we put a PowerPoint presentation, a short one, about 5 slides. Would that be okay if I shared?
Yes.
Sure, thank you so much. Okay, there we go. And I'm just going to switch off my video. Okay. Okay, there we go. So, our Capstone project was to envision the plausible future for nuclear security, and the scenario we developed was for an adaptive future. And for the adaptive change scenarios, these are our key drivers and challenges listed, and I'll read for you the key drivers: militarization of space, climate change, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence, geopolitical environment, nuclear disarmament, public pressure to disarm. And the challenges that were linked to this were the increased nuclear future and risk of accidents, resource competition due to climate change, lack of trust in governments, and the rise of non-state actors in and transitional threats. So we move on to what we like to call the tipping point, like what we think might happen in the next decade. And this brings us to our major first turning point. We foresee a period of rising instability fueled by the rapid aggressive weaponization of space. We're looking at nations being more advanced in military satellites for command to control, and this leads them to maneuver, and the risk of conflict and orbit increase dramatically. Um, the catalytic incident, I'll read. This heightened alert culminates in a major nuclear accident or a near catastrophic event that compels to international response. The outcome was saying this event will then expose the vulnerable possibilities in the current security framework, which leads to transforming the theoretical risk of nuclear war into immediate reality. The first catalyst, which is the power of public pressure. I believe that humans were inherently social beings. We thrive in groups and numbers, similar to the families from which we originate. The nuclear scale is then mobilized into a global movement with informed citizens advocating for change. The core demand here is the primary focus is on transparency, where we have people demanding for greater openness about nuclear arsenals and dismantling secrecy. The outcome is that arrival of nuclear arms control is driven not by the elites, but the collective will of the people. The second catalyst, which I'll break down, is the great unifier. Perhaps the most powerful one, I must say, to deliver a change is one where we are all familiar with, a shared threat that forced cooperation. The reason why we're saying it's a shared threat is it's incident on the earth, the climate crisis, which is our home. The crisis begins to worsen with devastating impacts of climate change accelerating and reducing the capability of the earth to be a home. The failure of old models. We're living in a capitalist society. This approach where people are driven by increase and profits, it fails. Then we see a shift. The world will shift. And these threats can only be tackled when we're together. The outcome is that the cooperation emerges as a necessity to break down the geopolitical tensions and reinforcing disarmament logic. In the new era of collective security, the concrete steps towards disarmament, states will actively reduce arsenals with many nuclear umbrella states transitioning to observers. There's success in doctrine and treaties. There's more trust, reduced public mistrust. The governing of new technology, internationalization, the agreements are created to restrict the destabilization use of emerging technology in warfare. Overall, we are saying, although nuclear weapons persist, the security landscape has fundamentally improved. The public pressure and shared awareness is now outweighing the deterrence and rivalry. This is a recap of what I've been sharing with you. At the top left, we have the recap of the drivers, the importance of collaboration, public mobilization as catalyst, and a vision of the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hazel, for that excellent summary of focus group 3 scenarios and the way, in particular, you get into the details of the drivers that you picked, why you picked them, and how you felt that they would interact with each other and also help to shape that future. I think that that was a really clear, a great introduction to the summary. And of course, I think uh, should entice people to read the rest of the report and read that section, because I think that these paint very vivid pictures of the future, actually, that I think are very understandable as well, based on the logics that you've gone through. So thank you very much for that presentation. And
Thank
now,
you.
no problem at all. I will now hand over to focus group 3. So, sorry, focus group 4, who worked on the radical change scenario. So there have two representatives from focus group 4. So firstly, we have Christelle Barakat, who is a researcher at the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies. She is a Lebanese Fulbright Foreign Student Program graduate from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, holding an MA in Peace, Security, and Conflict Studies with a concentration on international peace development. So areas of interest include conflict analysis and resolution, disarmament, sustainability, migration and refugee studies, women and gender studies, among others. So Christelle was also selected by the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs in New York as one of 10 United Nations Youth Champions for Disarmament between 2020 and 2022, one of 25 Leaders for Tomorrow in 2022, a Leader to the Future in 2023, and a Youth Leader for a World Without Nuclear Weapons in 2024. And Christelle is also joined by Nivedita, who is a long-standing member of the Emerging Voices Network and is also a research fellow at the Centre for International Law at the National University of Singapore, specializing in law and is fully qualified in that and brings a legal perspective often in her contributions. So with that being said, I will hand over to Focus Group 4. The floor is yours. And I'm looking forward to hearing you talk about your radical change scenario, or better said, scenarios that you came up with.
Thank you very much, Declan. I hope you can hear me well. As we reflect on the themes of our focus group, we are reminded of a poem that speaks to the essence of choice and divergence. Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. If I may, I'd like to share a few lines to begin. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. In our focus group, these two roads came to symbolize the two radical scenarios we envisioned, one bleak and the other hopeful. Yet strikingly, both scenarios were shaped by the same underlying forces or drivers: nuclear treaties, the use of nuclear weapons, destructive technologies, climate change, nuclear fear, and the state of international cooperation. These shared drivers remind us that while the path ahead may diverge, our choices today will determine which road the world ultimately takes. We've envisioned two contrasting extremes. One, a dire and unsettling scenario, the other, a vision of hope and promise. I shall begin with the darker path so that Christelle may lead us toward the brighter horizon, ensuring we conclude not in despair, but with a renewed sense of possibility. In the negative radical scenario, the harms of climate change quickly began to take effect. We see the continued escalation of the nuclear threats that we see today. These threats become much more normalized and appear regularly between international and regional adversaries. Now, within the first decade, there is serious escalation in research and implementation of emerging and destructive technologies, leading to a drastic increase in nuclear fear amongst the public further driving geopolitical tensions. By 2035, we see a complete breakdown of international climate, disarmament, and non-proliferation negotiations and agreements. It only gets worse by 2045, as we see climate change intensifying and tensions exploding in key nuclear hotspots across the world. Many nuclear adversaries escalate to the point of outright nuclear threats, making it almost impossible to reconcile these divisions and coordinate collaborations and diplomacy. By 2055, global nuclear arms treaties and agreements began to rapidly collapse due to a wave of withdrawals from member states. Tensions arise and states become more and more fearful of nuclear war over the decades. They stop listening to expert advice and find institutions such as the IAEA and the UN to be at best pointless and at worst a nuisance. The NPT and even the TPNW suffer significant withdrawals, reducing their legitimacy and ability to contribute to non-proliferation and disarmament, leaving many non-nuclear weapon states to conclude that they should perhaps consider pursuing nuclear weapons. Why not? And the rest are fearful of a dangerous and rapid expansion of proliferation. Between rivals, distrust and extreme suspicion only grow under these circumstances. Anyone favoring non-proliferation and disarmament is left furious at the states that withdrew from these vital treaties, leaving many relationships between states in absolute shambles, with international organizations and forums such as the UN rendered obsolete. Lines of communication are left in tatters. Any hope of encouraging states to cooperate is dashed into oblivion. Fears that nuclear deterrence would fail intensify further as we reach 2065. The international system, as we know it today, has collapsed. The world is left in chaos, and many fear it's only a matter of time before a nuclear war erupts. These fears are finally realized in 2075. As William Butler Yeats said, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. It's unclear if this is triggered by the failure of deterrence, an accidental detonation or first use, or a breakdown in communication and confidence-building measures. Global peace and security are lost as the world descends into nuclear war. Reliance on nuclear deterrence and mistrust contributes to nuclear war, and life as we know it ceases to exist, along with the lives of millions, if not billions. And on that tragic note, let me now hand over to Christelle, who will hopefully take you along on a journey towards utopia.
Thank you so much, Nivedita. So basically, I'm going to try my best to offer a different and more hopeful scenario. And I do want to stress that both scenarios are possible. It all depends, again, on political will and communication, as you will see from the more utopian scenario of radical change, which I will be presenting. So this scenario is really driven by a common concern about the planet's future. And it starts by member states wanting to respond to escalating tension, especially among nuclear weapon states, and to increased fear related to climate change. So instead of using fear as a motivation to reduce communication and to increase tensions, fear here is used as a catalyst for change, inciting or incentivizing fast and rapid responses and increased communication in order to prevent climate change from having these catastrophic consequences and to prevent nuclear war from happening. So obviously, for me, living in the Middle East, this feels a bit too close to reality or a bit too real, given the escalating regional dynamics. So there's a hope that diplomacy will prevail. So obviously, again, the fear of these two existential threats, which are climate change and emerging technologies, especially in relation to nuclear weapons, would lead to an increase in political will for cooperation, leading member states to increase their collaboration through international and multilateral fora like the United Nations. So this cooperation would exist to mitigate threats And eventually, through repetition and step-by-step confidence-building measures, more progress would be reached in the peaceful use of nuclear technology and sharing this technology. So by 2035, for example, collaboration is not seen as something impossible. It is actually quite possible. More ambitious climate commitments are made, and the successors of the Sustainable Development Goals, which had ended in 2030, make states realize the complexity and interconnectedness of reaching sustainable development. So more collaboration is achieved through this realization. This contributes or leads to lower tensions and an institutionalization of this approach to security. So we see more and more collaboration throughout the decades and the years. By 2045, we see existing nuclear treaties like the NPT and the TPNW, which flourish, and we have more states acceding and ratifying these treaties. We see an entry into force of the CTBT. We see more funding going to the IAEA, as well as increased trust and transparency in it, leading states to grant it even more funding and more on-site access to inspect different nuclear sites. By 2055, we see new treaties that emerge, both nuclear treaties, but arms control treaties as well, given the changing environment, which might require then, the emergence of these new treaties. We also see advancements in the peaceful use of nuclear energy and technologies, and more sharing of these peaceful technologies among member states, which helps advance efforts to combat climate change. So here we see an interconnectedness between nuclear and climate change that is realized, and more push to use technology for good. Again, more funding is also poured into international organization, and treaty adherence increases. By 2065, what we hope is that these important discussions gradually move from track 2, which focuses more on civil society actors and individuals, to tracks 1.5 and 1. So they reach, diplomatic fora. We have nuclear leaders which come together to discuss the total elimination of nuclear weapons. New hotlines are created to foster more communication, and there's increased adherence to nuclear treaties as well as IAEA inspections. By 2075, the hope is that total nuclear disarmament is agreed to. So member states and their leaders agree to dismantle and decommission nuclear arsenals. This is obviously overseen by the IAEA, which verifies and ensures the irreversibility of this dismantling. Climate change is still felt. However, a global catastrophe is averted due to political will and increased communication. The reliance on deterrence is reduced because member states have realized that deterrence is not sustainable. There is no choice but to collaborate together to reach a more peaceful vision of the world. So again, fear exists in both scenarios, but in the first, it's more fear from the other and selfishness that leads global cooperation to collapse and leads to a climate-induced nuclear war. In this more utopian, or let's say realistic scenario, if diplomacy is the recourse, we see fear turning into a force for change, leading states to put their differences aside in order to guarantee peace and survival. So even though these are two opposite futures, it's very important for us to remind ourselves and others that both of them are possible, and we may soon have to choose between them in relation to the future of nuclear security. Thank you so much.
And just to add on to Christelle, I conclude with the same conclusion of Robert Frost's poem, "Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." And as Erica mentioned, the unthinkable has a way of becoming routine. So let us think the unthinkable and make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christelle and Nivi. I think that you gave, again, amazing summaries of what you worked on. And I'd just like to remind everybody that the way the workshop was set up, where these scenarios came from, they simply had 3 hours overall to get in, get instructions, work on their scenarios, write them up for us, and then, speak to the rest of the group about them. So what they were able to do in such a short space of time, I think, was absolutely incredible. And also, groups were not asked directly to provide two scenarios, so I really appreciated their initiative to go for two, because when I was designing the project, I was thinking particularly with the groups that had more freedom when it came to how radical they could be with the changes, what direction they would go in. Would they think, generally, would they think more utopian? Would they maybe think more negatively? I thought that was quite interesting to see the direction they went in, and they decided to go with both. But then also, I think gave a very fitting end as towards the end of the report when you read through the scenarios. I think it's a great contrasting mirror that also reflects some of the trends that we see in the other scenarios, as as Christelle talked about the way fear operated, and in general, I think we see this across these different scenarios where fear, in a sense of fearing the other and fearing each other, I think is really drives the more negative scenarios and the more negative outcomes and behaviors, whilst a collective fear of a collective security, in particular thinking about obviously the threat of nuclear war, but also other issues like climate change, which we very much are all affected by, that fear can then actually be harnessed in a positive way to work on collaborations and improve relationships. So I thought that was really interesting how they then took both and worked on to show us these different alternatives. And in general, these are the trends that what was interesting as well, the levels of change across the reports. Obviously, we don't have representatives from focus groups 1 or 2 talk about their work today, but I would say as a trend across these scenarios, you see that the more level of change that is allowed and attributed to the groups, in general, the more room for favorable outcomes there is. And I think that gives us kind of a sobering thought about what direction we're currently on, where probably the most, other than the the radical group scenarios, very negative scenario, probably the most negative scenario I would say is the first one, is the no change, which I think hints at the feeling that we are not on a very positive pathway forwards. And the second group, which was given a small window for a small amount of change, was also pretty negative. And that I think is again telling us to maybe we're not exactly at a crossroads right now where you can pick a favorable or unfavorable future, but I think that there reveals maybe a sense that we're actually already going down one of those pathways, and that a lot of work is needed to be done if we do want these favorable outcomes. So that I think was a great way to kind of end the kind of summary of the scenarios. And now we're going to open up to questions and answers from the audience. So I would first of all particularly suggest if you have questions for Christelle and Nivi to ask them early, as they are on a time limit today. So hopefully they can answer some questions before they go. I really appreciate them presenting in their busy schedules. And with that being said, I'm going to hand over to Dave Cullen, our program manager, who has potentially a question or a comment.
Very much, and thanks for everyone for participating in this really interesting project, and obviously great thanks particularly to Declan for running it and giving everyone the opportunity to share their insight. I'd just be interested to hear from the participants to what extent they'd engaged with futures and foresight methodology before they participated in this project or another EVM project, and what their experience of it was, if it was new for them. Thanks.
That's a great question. I think it would be really interesting to see if many had before this project. So anybody would like to speak about whether they did, or even if you didn't have any previous experience, I think that'd be really interesting to hear, just to see how widespread it is. So yes, Nivi, if you'd like to go.
Hi, everyone. I had the privilege of attending a class on futures and foresight methodology in the previous policy cycle by Pupil from Horizon 2045. And I think that was a great introduction to the benefits and what futures and foresight methodology can bring to the table. And I think that definitely intrigued me. And that led to me attending a few of the sessions that were organized as part of the current policy cycle that's going to be launched in July that Declan mentioned previously, that project. There are a few of the sessions that were on futures and foresight methodology that I also managed to attend, or at least see the recording and learn from that. So that was the experience I had when I came to this scenario mapping and discussion. And I would definitely encourage everyone to look back hopefully at some of the recordings that have been published already on the basic website on Futures and Foresight methodology, and check out the Horizon 25 Foresight Radar link that was pasted in the chat, but also just check out the website in general. I think there's a lot of interesting information there. And the thing about foresight, futures and foresight methodology is you can apply it across the board to anything and everything. The scenarios that we consider is just one tiny little example of how it can be applied, but there's just many more scenarios and issues that can be applied to. So I would definitely continue using such methodology in my work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that insight, Nivi. And yeah, you've been obviously involved with a few things done on the EVN for the last couple of years on it. Does any of the other panelists have anything to contribute on that? Christelle?
Yes, I'm just very appreciative and thankful to you, Declan, and to Basic, and obviously, this amazing project, and obviously Horizon 2045. So this was really an introduction to visioning and foresight for me. I mean, before we engaged in the mapping and then into the focus groups exercise or activity, and now the report launch. My first introduction to this field was actually through attending some of the sessions of the policy cycle that was related to it, even though I was part of a different one, but I really appreciated the opportunity of being able to join some of the sessions and then watching the recordings of others. And I really felt that this was such a powerful tool that is very similar and resonates with me from the peace and conflict studies field, because we do engage also in a lot of similar mapping, but obviously here it's a bit different. So I feel I've gained a very valuable skill in my tool set that will help me, beyond even, the world of nuclear and disarmament into my day-to-day work on nuclear policies. And like Nivedita said, I would encourage everyone to go to the website, also check out the map, check out the different drivers, consider the many different permutations that one can reach if you just select different drivers and different scenarios and different case studies. And I think this is very valuable because we need to envision the future if we want to try to change it in the present, so that we either reach that ideal utopian vision or version that isn't so far away, or so that we can avert reaching the negative visions that we may reach through conducting these exercises. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christelle, for your insight on that as well, and again for your highly active involvement in our initiatives on this at the EVN. Before I quickly say something about kind of my introduction to it, does anyone else have any comments to make on the question? If not, I'll just quickly give a background as to why I kind of got into it, because a few years ago, actually, I got encouraged to apply for a foresight kind of training course that was actually run by the School of International Futures. I was encouraged to by our executive director at Basic, Sebastian Brixley-Williams, who has studied foresight methodologies and had done a previous course actually with them on a few years before, and felt it was very useful and that it could benefit me a lot. So I applied to it and managed to get in, and we ran was involved in a bunch of online sessions in 2023. And I've kind of stayed part of their they run like a network for their graduates and alumni from that course. They then going into the next year, that had me really looking at foresight methodologies more, and my previous line manager at Basic, Kim Obergfell, had started talking to Erica and the Horizon 2045 team actually about maybe potentially doing some work. And then I was invited in on that to discuss that. So we were already looking at bringing it into the Emerging Voices Network, which we thought would be something brilliant to share with network members. Not only for its potential to look forwards into the future, but also I think it's a great tool for getting people together of different backgrounds and to bring those expertise together and just let them bounce off each other, and people coming from totally different angles trying to say, well, I think if this happens, then from my perspective and my expertise, this would happen. And then somebody else go, well, also you might not have thought of this because I have this knowledge that this could happen. And it just, I think it's one of the most fun and invigorating parts of it. And then, of course, I then saw fellowship get launched by Horizon 2045 and had a fantastic time on it. But yeah, I think it's something that is growing more and more in the field, and there's increasing opportunities to explore it. And I think it can be very helpful for the field going forwards. So that being said, we have a question to answer which has been submitted for the Q&A function on here, which everybody can submit a question through. So I will open the floor up now to the question from Adila Ahmed. So she's asked us to please share how you set a scenario and what is the process and how you overcome the challenges. And thank you for the kind words about our efforts. So I'll just quickly talk about how I set the scenarios initially as part of the methodology that I decided to use for the scenario exercise. So because I kind of knew that it was going to be a challenge to kind of get them to write large vivid scenarios in one exercise. But the methodology that I used specifically was called a change progression scenario methodology, which is actually something that we used as part of my School for International Futures training course. And part of it is to try to with those sessions we had many weeks and we were able to look at kind of those four different levels of systems change. We're able to do that over a set of weeks to get you think about these scenarios differently, because a large part of the point of foresight thinking, as Erica spoke about before, is you're not trying to predict the future, you're trying to project, you're trying to think about multiple futures that can then inform you when you're making decisions and designing policy, rather than thinking, okay, I'm only going to plan for the best possible scenario and hopefully if I do all of this, this is exactly what I'm going to get at the end of it. Or if you think entirely about the most unfavorable scenario and you entirely legislate to just avoid that, you're simply planning, it becomes quite one-dimensional. So you think about a variety of scenarios and you try to keep them all in mind when you're making policy, so that you can have a policy that, yes, it pushes you towards the future that you want, but you also don't want to then be pulled towards a negative future. So it makes you more robust policies, essentially. So that was, and I thought that this methodology would be the best way to kind of give the group some parameters, because I think if I set it too broad, it would have been very unfair on them to think about it in just a few hours. But as you know, Christelle and Nivi showed, for example, they were able to think of two scenarios in such a short space of time. So maybe um, today, maybe they didn't need as much restrictions, but I'll now hand over to the groups to kind of discuss how they went about overcoming these challenges in their scenarios, because I was very impressed in how they did so in such a short space of time. So if any of the panelists have anything to say about how they went about that, yeah, please just raise your hand or start speaking.
Hello. Okay. So we basically brainstormed. It was an interdisciplinary affair. We're coming from different backgrounds. I, for one, am from the medical field, and I was working with my colleagues from different backgrounds. So we gave each other an opportunity to highlight from our perspective, without individual perspective, without narrowing each other down. And then from there, we built on those blocks and we found common interests. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Hazel. I think that's a very good, very good summary of the approach made with all those different backgrounds, and to have somebody, for example, from the nuclear medical field, is excellent, because I think sometimes we think a lot about weapons and we think a lot about energy, but it can be sometimes a bit, I think, easy to forget just how much nuclear is involved in the medical care for many different issues and needs, and also how that is then interlinked with the other aspects of nuclear technologies, how the safeguardings, how the sharing of peaceful nuclear technologies, for example, the NPT, how all of these things connect. The medical very much plays a vitally important role and obviously saves countless lives every year. Is a vital part of nuclear technology. So I really like the interdisciplinary point in particular, because I think that's one of the strengths of this methodology, and also the network, that we have so many different expertise available. So that being said, does anybody else have anything to contribute to that question? Okay, and no, thank you for that question, Adil. I think it's a really good question, and I think in terms of how in terms of the question, I think I would ask the panelists in terms of their futures of nuclear security. I guess thinking about the point I kind of raised before from the sense that I got from the scenarios that maybe people are thinking, the senses that we're maybe leaning in the current and in the present, that maybe we're headed down a more kind of unfavorable pathway. Um, I wonder if, first of all, if A, you kind of you do agree with that sentiment that maybe that we are already on a more negative pathway than unfavorable, rather than perhaps being at a crossroads. Um, and if so, how do you think we can try to get back at least to a position where we are more at a crossroads rather than being set down a more negative pathway? So I'd be interested to hear your take on that point. Christelle, if you'd like to speak.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Declan, that we are unfortunately on a negative spiral, or where tensions are really escalating and reaching a critical point, especially if we take into account the current state of world affairs and regional dynamics. And I believe, our group scenario, but other group scenarios also point to that direction. However, as I mentioned during my intervention, it is not too late to reverse tracks. What is very much needed is political will and communication, as well as collaboration between member states. But this does not, however, mean that it is only the sole responsibility of member states, because regular or normal citizens, such as yourself and myself, even in our professional capacity as researchers, we have an increased role in educating the public about the steps that can be taken, the urgency of the matter. So there needs to be a bottom-up push that motivates world leaders, especially from member states that possess nuclear weapons, to put their differences aside, to put renewed emphasis and commitment into diplomacy and diplomatic approaches, and to communicate and realize, A, the interconnectedness between the challenges, and B, the need to collaborate on finding common solutions, because at the end of the day, these rise beyond the individual calculations of member states, because it is our future altogether. I think what we are learning from the present is that we are doomed if we fail to see how something happening in one corner of the world impacts other corners, and how the immensity of these challenges really requires us to collaborate rather than adopt a siloed approach or individual steps. This is not to negate the importance of individual steps, but the impact is much bigger when these steps are added onto each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Christelle. I think that's a really hopeful and quite meaningful answer as well to that question. I think that there was as well as in your presentation, I think you, as much as present, potentially the potential of a very bleak future, I think that there's a key, key messaging in there that shows us that we still have some agency and hope in this. So thank you very much for that contribution. And I'll now hand over to Hazel.
Thank you. I would like to take it from this viewpoint, that to say it is relative, because we can't look at the nuclear industry as it was like 10 years ago, with technological advancements and even in our social settings and economic forum, with things like capitalism being more on the rise. We are exactly where we're supposed to be in this era. And I believe for it to be better, initiatives like this can counter the impact that is coming, because as technology goes more advanced, we also need to advance these safety measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hazel, for that perspective as well. And I think, I mean, that kind of feeds into Erica's kind of talk at the beginning about some of the events that are happening today and how different today is, as you said, than 10 years ago. Imagine when the nuclear industry was, in 2015. And I guess, when you think about the feeling around the review conference, for the MPT in 2015 and where we were then and where we are now, it's kind of remarkably different. And I imagine that that has an enormous impact, and also the perspective you're coming from as well. But just to think about how much has changed in 10 years, the concerns about emerging technologies, which is something that not only comes through a bit in this report as well, but the upcoming our Ploughshares policy cycle, which is also using foresight methodologies. When that comes out, one spoiler is that emerging technologies is heavily involved, and the nuclear field, geopolitically and technologically is changing rapidly, and that has to be factored in constantly as the world keeps changing around us. So thank you very much for your answers on those questions. And I think just to open the floor up to perhaps one more question, if anybody has one before we wrap up today. I think we just you have time for more. Thank you very much, Dave. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Declan. Yeah, I mean, following on from what's already been said, I wondered if any of the panelists had any ideas about dissemination of these ideas and these methodologies. How can we get people to attend to these needs above, beyond the ideas that have already been shared, and or engage with this way of looking at the future and understanding what needs to be done? Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. That's a great question. I'll open up the floor up to the panelists. Christelle, if you'd like to go ahead.
So I'm unsure if I fully captured the depth of Dave's question, but I am inclined to say what came to mind while he was asking it, and which is we need to make the public more aware about visioning and foresight. And I think this starts by the important role that educators have to play in this. So part of dissemination would be also to ensure that educators receive some sort of training perhaps on such methodologies, and that they do implement them in their classrooms to also engage students into visioning what the future might look like. So, obviously this exercise could be repeated based on which drivers or variables or case studies they would like to implement, be it in the nuclear field or elsewhere. But I really think that when stakeholders feel that their opinion is valued and integrated and that it matters, then they are more likely also to be actors in the change process. So it is as much about collaboration, even at the stakeholder level, local level, or national level and regional level, as much as it is about collaboration between member states. So ensuring that everyone is really partner in brainstorming and visioning these different futures or visions, and in foreseeing what might happen if we don't take actions today, and what could happen if we take actions today, and then be involved in also mapping out what these actions could look like and how they can be adapted to local contexts. Because again, there's no one size fits all. Things need to be really tailored based on the context and the sensitivity. And then I think, obviously for dissemination purpose, also leveraging the power of youth and using social media platforms and in creatively creating innovative ways to share and further disseminate. And what that might look like is, reels, or maybe a sort of challenge that they then share or nominate others to engage in, or sketching, or any other creative way that can captivate the attention, especially in a short time span. I feel that nowadays, the generation, not just mine, but increasing generations, have a shorter attention span. So it's about really capturing that in a catchy way, and then involving everyone as much as possible within their own skills and talents into being part of the dissemination process, that visioning, foresight, and ideating, as well as implementation aspects of different projects, helping to counter the negative scenarios and lead us more into positive outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christelle. I think that was an excellent answer. Lots of very good ideas about how to try to widen the scope of this work and the impacts, and to get the public engaged. I think is one of the biggest challenges that we face is getting more stakeholders involved, more of the public interested and feeling empowered about this issue. So thank you very much, and I'll now hand over to Hazel.
Thank you. That was quite interesting. Here, the point about social media and including reels. And I second that. I think my generation and the ones below us, and even everyone as a whole, we are more inclined to our phones, and if we can have the information readily accessible. And I'll also say knowledge on nuclear information comes at a later stage. Some children don't even know what nuclear is until they get into, let's say, until they are 10, 11, 12. We can start early, even having books that break down so that it becomes general knowledge for everyone. Is its increasing use is being seen more and more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Hazel. I think it's the age that people get involved in these issues and gain a awareness, I think, is also very interesting, as I certainly came into it. I didn't start focusing on nuclear issues until my master's year. For example, when I was studying at Aberystwyth, it was something that had never really grabbed my attention too much until it came up in a module that I was studying, working on, and well, that was about 2017, and it grabbed me then. But I just wonder how many people you miss by not educating people on these issues much earlier. So I think that was a really important contribution as well. So thank you very much for that question as well, Dave. I think that yeah, we have a lot of talks, for example, in Basic about trying to have a wider impact, and a lot of that thinking goes into how can we reach, beyond just policymakers, and how can we educate the public, and how can we get involved in that. So I think these are really important conversations that we need to be having collectively as a field, and it's important that the next generation is clearly already aware of these issues and has that in their thinking as you begin to become more and more influential in the nuclear field. So, with that being said, I'm going to start to wrap up the event. Thank you very much to my panelists who were also key contributors on this report. They did excellent work for the foresight radar, sorry, for the foresight methodologies map that we made, and in the scenario exercise. And today, I think they've done a great job of presenting and answering the questions that you've had for us. I'd also like to thank Erica Gregory for taking the time to speak to us. Later today in Washington, D.C. in person, she will be kicking off the second cohort of the Nuclear Futures Fellowship. So they are all in DC right now, about to get going their time pretty soon. So I think that is, I think it's wonderful that they're still going, and I'd highly recommend keeping an eye out for future cohorts to apply for, as I had an excellent time on it. And getting to do this report and getting to, for the first time in my early stage career, to have a project that was fully mine from the beginning, designed it, implemented it, made it as well. It's a fantastic experience and something that I'm really grateful for, as well as all the support that I got from the basic team, including my manager, Dave Collin, and my consultant on this, Chris Spedding, as well as Guru Tomasan, the research director at Basic, who gave some great feedback on the report as well. So that being said, I'll just before I conclude as well, I'll just mention some of the other stuff that we've been working on lately. So we recently hosted a launch event for our nuclear harms policy cycle, which was hosted by Dave a few weeks ago. That is now live on the Basic website and on our YouTube channel, as is the report, which is, I think, an excellent report of co-authored works by many of our EVN members working together to develop a really rich policy cycle talking about the harms of nuclear weapons. And the report has been met with great feedback, and has also caught the attention of some of the departments at the UN, actually, who have been in touch with us about it, which I think goes to show how much impact these can have, and how much talent we have in the network that they can write such an impactful report. So hopefully that will lead to more things in the future. We also have upcoming for our Ploughshares Fund policy cycle, which is looking at desiloing pathways to a world beyond nuclear deterrence. We'll have that report launch announced soon. That should be by the end of the month. But we'll be in touch about that. I'm really looking forward to presenting that work, which is also on foresight methodologies. And in general, for the EVM, we are kind of concluding this academic year of work, and soon we'll be announcing more and more of our initiatives going into the next year, into the 2025-26 year. So keep an eye out for that. And if you're watching this as a non-member, please get in touch if you want the sign-up form. We are now open to membership applications all year round. and you'll be immediately allowed into the network to see all the opportunities that we offer, our bi-weekly mailing list, where we share opportunities, and you can share your own research with the network members and be involved in our Slack spaces, which we are working on making to be more active and have more kind of informal social events on. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. Again, I think it's been a great panel discussion after the report launch, and I will speak to you all soon. Bye.